This is best friend of the show, Monica Cabina, artist and colorist on Batman: The Adventures Continue. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Hey everybody, welcome to a bonus episode number 17 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, along for the ride as he always is, my good friend, brother, and the gentleman that runs our Twitter account. That's right, it's Liam. Liam, welcome to bonus episode number 17, where, as the title suggests, if you read it before you started playing this episode, we are here to talk about a poster.
That is right, Cal. It is a exciting time, so to speak. Well, it will be. It'll be an exciting time in some
exciting time.
No, it is. We're being facetious because we don't have a ton to actually go on of. So it's going to be a nice piping pot of speculation for the next half hour or so here. But yeah, so we got a pretty big announcement, actually a couple announcements on earlier this week or last week, as we found out that, most importantly, or most headline-grabbingly, I would say, we are aware now that there's a new Batman cartoon in the works being produced sort of in tandem for HBO Max and Cartoon Network. And the people that are attached to the project so far, we know the names are J.J. Abrams, Matt Reeves, and a guy named Bruce Timm, who I do not know.
Bruce W. Timm, I believe.
Bruce W. Timm. Yes.
That's
now I know
the other Tim.
That's
the other
right.
Bruce Timm.
Now I know who we're talking about.
Yeah, holy cow. Man, this was exciting, huge, amazing news to start the week. And you sent me the article while I was at work, and I think I fell out of my chair. My coworkers looked at me a little bit strangely, but man, this to me is exciting. Now, previously on the DCAU Review, if you recall, back in the archives, you can actually check our first episode of Discuss This League, where we were actually talking about there's been this rumor for several years now, because there's nothing hotter than nostalgia. Nostalgia is still, Hollywood is still riding the nostalgia wave. Everything is getting rebooted. Everything that is old is new again. Yeah. No original ideas exist anymore.
We ride that wave a little bit on our show.
That's right.
to say the least.
It's the entire reason why our show exists.
Right.
We love the nostalgia as our generation just holds dearly to those things that we loved from our childhood. So because of that, and because of the popularity of streaming services, everybody has to have them, and you need to have content that brings people to spend their $9 or $10 a month to access your streaming service. You have to have something to entice them. So what better to do than nostalgia? There's been these rumors for several years now, and then more intensely over the last few months, that there was going to be a Batman the Animated Series reboot. We didn't know what that meant. We didn't know if that meant new stories set in that original DCAU timeline. We didn't know if that meant just additional, literally going back and recasting people and doing more stories from the original Batman the Animated Series and not bothering any of the other continuity or tie-ins or any of that stuff. We really didn't know. We speculated a lot on that episode. I would advise you check it out. We had our friends from Tim Talk and our friends from the DCAU Watchtower database on there to talk all about what we fantasized about what that could mean. But this week we have a little bit, not a lot more, but a little bit more clarity from this announcement. So based on the announcement that one of the Hollywood rags, I believe, reported first, it was Hollywood Reporter or Forbes or one of those, it seems that the announcement, pairing the announcement with J.J. Abrams and Matt Reeves, J.J. Abrams, of course, of Lost fame, Star Wars fame, Cloverfield, he's done a lot of different things. I think we found out this week he's a bit of a controversial character. I guess
a bit of a lightning rod.
It
helped our engagement on Instagram. Honestly, I'm glad I put his name in the tags. If we're being honest, because that post did quite well as far as people commenting and liking on it. But no, yeah, he's there's a lot to say. I think it's almost inarguable. He's a very creative man.
For sure.
Whether or not his creative visions always come out exactly right, that's obviously a completely subjective thing. Whether you liked or didn't like Lost or Alias or some of his TV work, going all the way through, as you mentioned, to things like Cloverfield or Star Trek or Star Wars, that's totally up to you. But he's a big Hollywood name, and at putting him on this animated series, certainly I think is going to make people take notice. And obviously when you combine that with director and Matt Reeves, who he has worked with on actually one of those Cloverfield sequels, the good one with John Goodwin, not the bad one where it was in space.
Correct.
Thank
you for clarifying.
But yes, they've worked together. Matt Reeves, of course, also has done the more recent Planet of the Apes movies, and of course, obviously, most famously when it comes to the character of Batman, he's directing The Batman.
That's right.
Starring Robert Pattinson, coming out sometime next year. So having people who are those kind of big, higher echelon people at Warner Brothers and DC filmmaking, and then bringing them together with sort of the godfather of DC animation, one of the godfathers of DC animation of this modern era in Bruce Timm, and having their powers combined in some sort of giant creative Voltron of Batman storytelling. It's everyone's gonna watch this, right? Like, whether anyone who has any passing interest in the character of Batman, significantly to us, obviously, people that grew up watching Batman the Animated Series still go back to it quite often. This is gonna be a big deal when it comes out, I think, for fans who are more fans of the movies because of those big names in J.J. Abrams and Matt Reeves being on the project, but also, of course, having Bruce Timm is going to make, I think, a lot of people who remember the show fondly are going to come to it. And, of course, obviously, it's going to be on Cartoon Network. You would think this is also going to be, to a certain extent, aired at creating a new generation. This is going to be created for children to an extent as well, to maybe make new fans for who will... This could end up being their quintessential Batman for their generation. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's interesting because, as you mentioned, we had a lot of interaction with certainly a vast amount of opinions. Again, a lot of the heat per se came against J.J. Abrams. A lot of people take issue with what he did with beloved franchises like Star Trek and Star Wars. Mm-hmm. Whether or not he was culpable for either of those, I think is up for debate. I think that I didn't have an issue. I wasn't a Star Trek guy growing up, but I've seen his, I think 2 of the 3 Star Trek movies he did. Or
I think he only did the first. He may have been a producer on the 3rd one. I think he only directed the first 2.
Okay, I saw 2 of the 3. And I think they were both the ones that he directed, and they were fine. They were interesting to me. I didn't have any sort of endearment to that property, so I didn't. Maybe that's why. Star Wars, on the other hand, we're huge Star Wars fans.
Yes.
And while I did not love the way that the trilogy ended up going, he only directed 2 and was involved with 2 of the 3. I liked the 2 movies that he ended up doing a lot better than the 3rd one. But those movies have their own issues, and whether or not he was responsible for how they were directed or the storytelling is also up for debate. So I know a lot of people are still dealing with PTSD with how, from my understanding, with how Lost ended. I'm not a Lost guy either. A lot of people still hold that against him.
Yeah, I fell off around the 3rd season or so, and it seems like maybe that was the right call.
I feel like I can somewhat identify with that, having been a Walking Dead fan, though, where it's just like they don't have any idea how the ending of this show is going to go. And I fell off Walking Dead a long time ago, so I can kind of agree with that. And then to be disappointed with it's just not, from my understanding, it's just the ending is very unsatisfactory. So with that said, to me, I think the sneaky thing, and what I told a lot of people that we interacted with this week, is, to me, J.J. Abrams' name is attached to this for that recognition only. I can't imagine that J.J. Abrams, with him being brought into WB, Bad Robot, his production company, was purchased by WB, from my understanding. So them bringing him in, they're gonna attach his names to various different things as producer or executive producer, and that's going to give it some clout, because when you hear that name, J.J. Abrams, love him or hate him, there is some clout that comes with that. And not so much with Matt Reeves, who's definitely a rising star, and I think once maybe the Batman film comes out, that could change forever. That could be the defining name on this. But if you had just slapped Bruce Timm's name on it, I think you're limiting your scope of who would know or care about that.
Yes.
You'd have to go into a lot more depth. So in a way, this is almost history repeating itself in what happened with the original Batman the Animated Series. So this one, by the way, it looks like it's going to be called Batman Caped Crusader. So it's tying itself to this launch, possibly, of a new Batman franchise. So you're going to have people that are excited about this new Batman movie that's coming out. Even for the stinger and the trailer that they've already put out for it, there was a lot of buzz, a lot of excitement, a lot of people love Batman. He's still at an all-time high when it comes to popularity. So if you tie this into the release of that movie, the excitement that happens, it's not all that different than what happened with Batman Returns in 1992, where you're tying this cartoon, even though Tim Burton has nothing to do with it. He's not making any decisions on it. He was originally tied to it as kind of making as an executive producer, at least originally. So you tie this name to it, and it gives it that clout. People are going to tune in because they're interested. But he really doesn't have a lot of decision making or any, like, he doesn't carry any weight other than just his name being attached.
Right, yeah, and obviously Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski have credited him in the sense that if he wasn't sort of on board with an animated series sort of vaguely in the vein of his movies, it probably doesn't get made.
Right.
And obviously there's, elements, the design of Penguin, things like that were certainly brought over from that. And that's sort of, and that was also, as I know Bruce Timm and Paul Dini and Eric Radomski have said, they were allowed to make the show sort of as dark and gritty as it was, because they were saying, hey, this is in the vein of the very popular, profitable Batman film,
right,
by Tim Burton. So certainly he had a role in it, but yes, he was not an active creative force on the project, and it would be surprising to me if it turned out that J.J. Abrams and maybe even Matt Reeves really are, like, super hands-on in that process. But, I mean, obviously that and again, it's so early on in the process. The only other real details we have about the series at the moment are, there's sort of a joint press release from Abrams and Reeves, where they talk about they want to introduce Batman to a new generation. They specifically mention, though, it's sort of a reimagining, and they want it to bring it back to the film noir roots.
And that's J.J. Abrams. That would be his fingerprints, because he has an appreciation for that older film, that the way that films in old Hollywood and all of that is very much in what he appreciates. So him talking about bringing it back to that root, and from the poster itself, which I believe was drawn by Bruce Timm, it certainly looks like it could be a Bruce Timm drawing. I don't know if it was credited to him or not, but definitely invokes that original 1939-1940 appearance of the Dark Knight himself, in that original Bob Kane, Bill Finger drawing, with the sort of the longer ears, but still like the top of the head kind of meeting kind of like a bulbous head almost. And really not all that different than a Bruce Timm directed short that we saw a few years ago as well, which got our wheels turning as to what that could look like.
Yeah, the image itself very much is evocative of Detective Comics 31 specifically. It's sort of this overarching Batman, sort of the big giant face in the sky, and you kind of see some of the set around him. There's in that cover it's sort of a mountain cliff area, whereas in the new poster it's more of the sort of, again, looks very similar to something out of Batman the Animated Series, a very sort of Art Deco inspired old old looking cityscape below him. But yes, that is certainly seems to be what they're going for, is something which I think Matt Reeves has talked about wanting to do in his live action film as well, as wanting to sort of go back to a simpler sort of detective style of Batman, and certainly it seems like it might be taking cues from those very early Bill Finger and Bob Kane comics. But as you mentioned, Cal, for the 75th anniversary of Batman, there was a few different sort of animated shorts created. There's a fantastic Batman Beyond one that was created by Darwin Cook, but the Bruce Timm one, very interestingly, not only was it very much designed to be this sort of very 1930s, sort of even less technology than maybe your average episode of the original Batman series, in sort of the character designs and things, but also it was entirely in black and white.
Correct.
So that, and whether or not I don't know that I could see them doing a full series, especially if it's going to be on Cartoon Network in black and white. But yeah, I could see a very sort of dark, muted color palette, sort of, I could see them going for that sort of vibe as the series begins to develop.
I agree. Yeah. All right. So last thing, I guess, that we'll talk about here, and this is pluses or minuses, love it or hate it. From that press release, they do talk about. I think they mention a new universe, and they use the word returning to, but I'm pretty sure they talk about a new universe and introducing a new generation to Batman's Rogues Gallery and all of that, and reinventing. So from all intents and purposes, it appears at this point that this is not going to be a DCAU continuity reboot of Batman the Animated Series. So it's going to it seems like it's going to stand on its own. Again, this is all we have is a poster and a press release, but that could change, who knows, in the next several months, we never know. Right. But it appears, at least from first glance, that this is not going to be tied to the DCAU.
Yeah, and again, we discussed this quite a bit more in depth on our first episode of Discuss This League with Maddie and Chris, but that's something I think that we kind of are in lockstep on, and again, we discussed this with quite a few people on both on Twitter and Instagram this week at DCAU Review. I talked to people who were very disappointed that this isn't the direct Batman the Animated Series revival that was sort of rumored, as we mentioned, that sort of started in a Kevin Smith podcast a little while back, and but I think you and I kind of looked at it more, and again we talked about it more in depth on that Discuss This League episode, but there's a lot of danger, I think, that comes from danger's maybe a more dramatic word than it needs to be, but with going back directly into that reboot, we talked about, speaking of reboots, Star Wars. Yep. Or if you look at Arrested Development is probably my number one go-to example for something like this, where it's very hard to revive a project after this many years at all, but especially one that is so beloved. And I know Bruce Timm has personally spoken about being kind of hesitant to go back to that DCAU world, because he's not competing, he doesn't feel he's competing with or continuing on the stories as they actually are, so much as he's competing with people's memories, people's nostalgia, the feelings they had when they watched that show when they were 15 or 12 or 8 years old. Yep. That cannot be recreated, and that if he feels like it would be a disappointment if he tried to go back and tell those stories, and the people that have such a love for them were let down by it. He feels like it would be a mistake. So I think we're both of the mind. I'll let you give your piece here in a second. I've been talking for a while.
That's okay.
But I think I am very much of the mind that I love the idea of doing something in the vein of Batman the Animated Series, of doing a simpler, stripped down, less high-tech gadgetry Batman, a detective Batman, but without having to live up or try to connect itself or be bogged down in specific continuity with certain characters or villains or other sort of supporting roles, not feeling necessarily bogged down or feeling like that's a chain, because that's not what I would want. I wouldn't want, and that goes for any reboot of a property, I would never want someone to come back to it because they felt like they had to.
Right.
I would only want them to come back to it if they felt they had a good story to tell. And so creating something that is in a similar vein but doesn't have to necessarily play within this certain defined sandbox, maybe that's actually a good thing.
No, I agree. I think we tweeted out this week and responded a lot that this is the best case scenario, I think, for us. Bruce Timm is involved, and actually it was interesting. There's some people that don't necessarily care for Bruce Timm either, I guess, because of some of the direct-to-video things that he's directed. But I'd say he's got a pretty good batting average when it comes to Batman and animation, and certainly he's built up enough goodwill for me to give him to be trustworthy enough to me. So having Bruce Timm involved in an animated project of Batman that could really launch a new a new universe going forward is exciting. It's very exciting. And then having Matt Reeves' name tied to it, great. Maybe he writes an episode, maybe he directs an episode. Mm-hmm. So having other and bring in additional writers or launch a new generation too. We talked about it, I think, way back on our first Elseworlds month, that the last animated Batman property on television for this generation was Beware the Batman. Yeah. There hasn't been a Batman animated television show in, when was that, 2011, 2012?
Yeah, it's like 2012, 2013.
So probably over almost a decade since there's been a reoccurring Batman animated property on television. So that's a lot of years for a child not to be exposed to to the Dark Knight in animated form. So what a great opportunity to sort of launch that. And for them to have to try and tie it into DCAU and write stories around that and fit it into continuity and keep the people who are now 20 and 30 and 40 years old that loved that original Batman the Animated Series happy, while also being interesting to an 8 or 9 or 12-year-old. It's just like it's really, I can't imagine trying to balance that. So to me, this is the best case that we could have looked for. It also has no chance in tarnishing a legacy that has really lived up to has really not done very much to be tarnished, even in the extended properties that they've done over the last couple years. Give or take Batman and Harley Quinn, that was probably the pariah of all the DCAU stuff. But for the most part, there have been a lot of home runs that have been hit. So they don't have to very much worry about tarnishing that legacy, and still able to do some fun stuff that could be very appealing to both adults and kids.
Absolutely. And look, I don't think this also means that we'll never get a, in continuity DCAU property again or anything. Like, maybe they'll cross over even at some point.
Sure.
You have some of these sort of adjacent DCAU things, like the Justice League Gods and Monsters movie from a few years ago that had a bunch of shorts that were developed for YouTube that were going to kind of create their own sort of parallel universe in the same style. So it's not, I don't think this is completely new ground. Like, this has happened before, and I think you can do that. And again, if you want to cross them over one day, great. If you want to keep them completely separate, I think that's fine too. But I think for this series, for what they want this series to be, which is obviously like a big prestige animated series, but that also has appeal to kids, yeah, I think trying to bog it down in continuity from 30 years worth of shows is it's going to be a real rough ask for a lot of new fans. So yeah, I think as you said, I think this definitely qualifies for the best of both worlds when it comes to any sort of animated Bruce Timm Batman project coming out.
For sure. And Liam, we'd be remiss as we kind of wrap things up here over the next few minutes. Not kind of buried in that press release from DC, they happen to mention also not only is this Batman Caped Crusader show in development, but there's also returning to animation for the first time, also in several, at this point would be several decades. There's production being done on an animated Superman television show.
That's right. So yeah, we know a little bit more in the way of details. We actually have we know who is playing Superman, the actor Jack Quaid, who folks would know from The Boys and a few other Netflix and Amazon series, I believe, is going to be playing a young Superman. As they've sort of established it as this series that's going to be focusing on a young Clark Kent and Lois Lane, sort of just starting out at the Daily Planet, kind of establishing themselves, as well as kind of meeting Jimmy Olsen for the first time, and then sort of coupling that with Clark sort of taking his first steps as Superman. Looks like we've only seen one image so far. It does look like it has a bit of an Eastern anime flavor to the character designs, at least. So we don't know a ton more about that, other than that we have Jack Quaid as Superman and Alice Lee playing Lois Lane, and the series is also being produced or executive produced by Sam Register, who's I think he's the president of Warner Brothers Animation. And this is another one that's sort of being co-produced for HBO Max and Cartoon Network. So yeah, it's pretty exciting times for the world's finest here, as we have two new animated series that, like we said, it looks like they have a lot of talented people. I think they're going to take good stewardship of these characters, but that it doesn't necessarily need to be a connected universe either. I think letting these characters sort of stand out on their own in their own series for a while could be fun and a little bit more refreshing.
Yeah, I agree. And there's we know that also a little bit ago there was an announcement, maybe even back at DC Fandom, that Aquaman King of Atlantis is also another cartoon being developed. That one looks like a little bit more geared towards a younger audience, maybe based on the animation style. Hard to tell.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know a ton about that either. But it's always great to hear that there's more DC animated content coming out. One of the things that I think is really not debatable between the two major comic book companies is that DC continues to be the king when it comes to animation and taking their properties and translating them over into animation, which is ironic seeing as how Disney owns Marvel and Disney is just one big animation studio that has taken over the world. But it's great to see that Warner Brothers is hopefully, and with their merger with AT&T and all that hopefully AT&T is and that conglomeration now continues to invest in animation, and certainly in making DC Comics the sort of preeminent comic book presence in the animation field.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. Hopefully there's even more projects to come. I know a lot of folks were talking this week about wanting to see a Wonder Woman animated series. That seems like a no-brainer to us. I think
slam dunk.
The success of the movies and everything. It seems like,
let's get Susan Eisenberg in here.
Absolutely.
It doesn't even have to be DCAU, but I mean, we prefer it to be DCAU.
Sure.
But
but I think that's an easy slam dunk. And then obviously we know there's going to be things like with the Flash movie, the live action Flash movie, which is in production now, and the Black Adam movie. Like maybe there could be a Shazam. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas out there, and I think it's something that people should remember more, is that a lot of times these characters, because maybe they come out of a cartoonish comic book, they lend themselves to animation very well, and you can tell stories in animation with these characters that you just cannot do in a live action 2-hour movie.
Absolutely.
So I'm definitely excited, and fingers crossed we have even more DC animation projects on the way.
Agreed. All right, Liam, well, that will wrap us up for this week. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this bonus episode. If you would like to interact with us and let us know what your thoughts are on the exciting announcement of Batman Caped Crusader, My Adventures with Superman, and Aquaman King of Atlantis, and really anything else associated with DC animation. Maybe that you like the Harley Quinn series, or I know there's a lot of excitement about the upcoming Justice Society movie, and of course Batman, Long Halloween, all of that. Some excitement, a lot of stuff still happening here with DC animation. So tweet us at DCAU Review. We'd love to have those conversations. You can also follow us at DCAU Review on Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and then don't forget to also give us a follow on the Pod Tower channel on YouTube. Give us a follow there. You can subscribe to us, get our content, get the thoughts from some of our friends over at Tim Talk and the Watchtower database as well. But until next time, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU.
Adios.